Welcome to the Dog Pound. My name is Dan Sheehey, and we have the most wonderful show for you today. With us in the studio is none other than Barbara Wymer. She was an employee of CBS and many other stations in television and radio in the 1950s. Hello and welcome. To start things off, why don't you tell us a little about what your position at CBS was?
At CBS, I did various things. Mostly I worked in the advertising side of things where commercials are presented and sent out to other stations throughout the CBS network around the country.
And what led you to CBS?
A job. I had other jobs before that, and then when I was in Hartford, Connecticut, I was asked to work at a station in New York, and my boss said, no, if you're going to work in New York, you should work for CBS. So I went to CBS that way.
And did you go to school for anything?
Yes. I grew up in Stoughton. I graduated from high school, and I didn't want to go to a four-year college, so I went to a two-year school in Boston. At the time, it was Leland Powers School for Radio, Television, and Theater. I was fortunate when I left to do a summer of summer stock in Canada. Then I went to a station in New Hampshire, then I went to Bridgeport, Connecticut, and then I went to Boston at WEI, and then I went to Hartford, and then I went to New York City. 10 years. It was a great life.
And what did you do at CBS, like in the scheme of advertising?
In order for a large organization like a big car company, in those days cigarettes were a big thing, to advertise on smaller stations throughout the country, they had to work through an advertising agency, which then came to the organization, or part of the CBS that I worked for, which salesmen would write up a schedule. What do you want to have? What stations would you like to cover? Approximately how much do you want to spend? And all of that was then put together, speak to the stations throughout the country on the phone, get information. Do they want this? Put it together. Finally, when it was all set, the stations had a schedule. It went back to the advertiser, and it actually happened, we hope. If it didn't happen, anybody got to make good and didn't pay for it. So.
Now, since you worked in advertising, I think some people would like to know, were advertisements back then as annoying as the ones we see today?
No. A lot of jingles, which could be annoying. However, most of the commercials told you exactly what it was they wanted you to buy, where to buy it, and sometimes how much it would cost. And they didn't change the commercials for each product as frequently. It just was easier to understand what it was you were supposed to go and buy, smoke and or drive, whatever it was.
And now I was told that opposing companies used to have regulations about like when their commercials could air, and what were they?
The companies didn't have the regulations. Basically, the advertising people did. You could not have competing products within sometimes an hour, certainly no less than a half an hour of each other. If you watch television nowadays, you can see Bernie and Phil's, and a couple of things later you get Bob's. That would never have happened. It had to be a period of time, because everybody was afraid that if you had two together, what would they do? Which one would they pick, mine or someone else's product? So that was very definitely in place.
Could you give us like an example of?
All right, if you were going up against, if you wanted to be commercial to be next to a program that was sponsored by a car dealer, a big car, Ford, Chevrolet, you couldn't have it there if you were trying to sell an automobile. It just didn't work.
And now, in your opinion, do you think that advertisements back then were as effective in comparison to the ones we see today?
They were certainly, it gave you more time to figure out what it was they were trying to get you to buy, because they didn't come so quickly. The other night I was watching something, and it was less than 10 seconds. They went through at least 5 different types of things they wanted you to do and or buy, and I thought, I have no idea. Forget about it. Couldn't do that. Had to have it specific.
Now, did you ever have to do work in the studios, or were you just basically, in the office?
When you work for a small station, you get to do things that you never thought you would do before, one of which I did in Hartford was as the weather girl. But the only thing a woman could do on television at that time was to be the weather person, had to be a man. But it was fun, and I enjoyed it. Other things that we did were kind of interesting, but not necessarily important.
And I understand that one time when you were working in the studio, a light fell on your head. Could you tell us?
In Bridgeport, Connecticut, the whole station was much bigger than this room here. And in order to set the area for the program, the man was putting up all the lights and the covers and everything else, and he just yelled at me and he said, "Would you just come in and sit down so I'll know where to put the lights?" Well, he put them up. One of them didn't stay there. It came down, crashed on my head. Off to the hospital. I was fearful they would shave my head, but they didn't. I recovered. But it was an interesting experience, not one I would like to repeat.
Did you suffer any damage from
No.
that?
Oh, no. I got a couple of days off. That was good.
Oh, nice. And what would you say you learned from the industry?
Did I learn? Well, I think one of the things that I learned was that in many ways, especially at that time, it was a very more or less loosely knit community of people. For instance, I never really had to go and seek a job. I usually was referred by someone that I had worked with before. I think it's very important to do the best job you can, even when it's not what you want to do, because you never know who's paying attention and who your next boss might be. So.
And what would you say your best experience while working in the industry and even CBS was?
Well, I think probably when I was in New York City, and because I had a boss that wasn't terribly efficient, I would be the one that actually set up the schedules for the stations across the United States, the ones that we serviced. And there was a feeling of pride about that. So I think that was probably one of the best things that I did, and just being able to be in New York for 5 years and find work and do a job and be I don't know, sort of important in a small way.
Did you have the opportunity to work with any people of any particular fame or anything?
Yes and no. When you work in advertising, you're really not close to the people who are on air. You get to know a few of them. There were a few of them in Boston that Bob Wilson, who was the Bruins game caller. What do you call that?
Announcer.
Announcer, that's a good word. Other people that no longer around. You have to remember my age.
Yeah, no,
So
okay.
everybody's retired that I might have known.
When you were in New York, what was the lifestyle like?
Fast-paced. Everything was urgent. Everything was important. You really didn't. It's unlike any other place that I've ever lived. Everything goes quickly. You have to know who you are. You have to be strong, and you can't. There's no one, no organization that's around there to sort of help you and keep you going. So you're on your own.
Well, it sounds like everyone that you worked with seemed to like you. You weren't that one that the opposite people. No.
They can't all like you, and you can't like all of them. But you just have to pretend sometimes, because they may be more important than you are. So you can't go around making your feelings known. But for the most part, everybody's congenial. They're all trying to do the same thing.
It seems like your bosses, they always referred you to higher and higher
Yes,
stations.
yes.
So.
I was very lucky. People seemed to think I was doing well, and they did make me help me go up the ladder, which was good.
So from the perspective of someone who was liked in the office, what was the average day like?
Oh my, usually hectic. Lots of time on the telephone. Lots of time trying to figure out how you could get a commercial in a particular program that was already full, or if you could get the station to make a change. Just a lot of negotiating over where these commercials and how these commercials would be best shown to your public.
Were you working with, regular advertisements that were pre-recorded, or like stuff you'd see, like live advertisements?
We didn't have anything to do with that product. The actual commercial was the responsibility of the advertising agency. So once in a while you would get a mock-up, or you would get some ideas to what they were going to be, how they were going to show their particular product. But for the most part, I would see it when everyone else did on television. Nothing else. Yes?
Are there any specific commercials that you remember that may have had some type of, effect at the time, like public service announcements or
Not
things?
too many specific ones, but one of the things that happened, because television was so new and there was no field of people to come in and do the jobs, mostly you would have people who were well known on radio. Or you might have somebody who was an actor and not doing, would take a specific product and be the spokesperson. Again, women played a very minor role in all of this. They might be in a commercial, or they might be, but basically they were not on air as much. The most important part of it was that you had to look good. Before, you could be some scraggly old man on radio and nobody would ever know that, but scraggly old men didn't do well on television, so you were probably out of a job and some young guy came in and did it. So that was kind of, it's too bad for people who'd been in the business for a long time, but it was visual, so it had to be that way.
Now, a little bit of change in topic, but when you were younger, say, the age of people in, the TV production classes,
I can't remember that far back then. Go ahead.
would you say that you thought, I want to go into radio or I want to go into television? Or
It wasn't until I was in high school, a senior in high school, and I was in a play and I did some other things, and I realized that I didn't want to be a nurse or a teacher or all those other things that my friends were going to be. That's why I went to Llewellyn Powers. But when I did summer stock, what I realized was, although I enjoyed being out front and performing, I much more enjoyed being the stage manager and being in charge of all of it. So that made me realize that I needed to go into some field of the business where I was actually going to be doing something and I would be responsible for what I did and be proud of it, hopefully.
Could you tell us what summer stock is?
Okay. During the summer, theaters would open in various parts. There were a lot of them in the Cape and other places where you put on a performance, people come, they enjoy it, but it's mostly everybody does something. You may be the actor in one of the performances, then the next time you may be doing the costumes. The next time you might be the person who's actually setting the stage. Everybody does something, works hard, but it's a lot of fun, and I had a wonderful time, and I realized I never really wanted to be an actress. That was a good thing to learn.
Was that a local thing, or?
I was in Canada.
It's a long haul.
It was a long haul on the train.
And what would you say to people who wish to work in the television industry?
Well, I sort of go back to something I said earlier. I think if somebody offers you a job, it may not be what you actually want to do, but sometimes if there's nothing else happening, or if you like to take the opportunity to find out something about yourself and another part of the industry, I think you take the job. You don't have to stay in a job if it's not working for you, but you will learn more working in a setting that you want to be a part of than if you're just going from door to door hoping that somebody has a job somewhere. And you more than likely may have to leave your area and start in a smaller place.
Did you do any intern or externships?
No.
No,
There's no such thing.
Oh, okay. Well, now I know that a lot of people have the opportunity
Right,
during the
exactly.
senior year of high school.
Yes. No, none of us were allowed to go to one of the stations in Boston and do whatever they wanted us to do to help out. No, that didn't happen.
So you say you started working with radio.
Yes.
Could you tell us what the difference, the change between radio and television was, if there even was any?
The visual, that was the big thing. You could have anyone sitting at a radio mic and talking, and they could be going, it doesn't matter. It's the voice that counts. So if you had a great voice, you would get a job. Television, you had to have a great voice, and I might just add that at that time, everybody was supposed to sound as though they came from the Midwest. You couldn't talk like Boston people because you'd never get a job. But so it was all about the visual. You had to look and present yourself well.
So going back to what you said before about taking jobs you might not want, were you ever taking a job and you were just like, oh, I really do not want this job?
The first one in New Hampshire. I was the person who did all the billing, and I have terrible math skills. So, but I did that because I had a friend up there, and I just wanted to have a job, and that's why I wasn't there for, just a couple of months. Unfortunately, went off to Bridgeport and had a much better career down there.
And what did you do once you got to Bridgeport? Were you still in the same thing, or did you finally change to something you
No,
wanted?
I did a lot of things the first time. I worked in at that time, all of our music was on a recording, a disc, a platter, whatever. I worked in that library. I did some of the scheduling. I did all different kinds of things. And the station itself was opening a TV station, and that's when I switched to the TV end of it. And we were in a very small building on a very tall hill, because supposedly that made your signal go further. No one could see it because it was UHF, which no one had at that time, but we had a good time.
Now, traveling back in time on a journey here, if you could have done anything different, maybe taken a different job or something else, would you have done it, or would you wish you could have done some other position?
Not really, because I go back to what I said about when I was at the Summer Theater. I enjoyed being up front and performing, but I was most comfortable and felt better prepared to be behind the scenes and do the things that were important and put everything on the air. So all the different jobs that I had, I was the person who instigated a program or an advertisement, all of these things in stations all around the country. And there was a great sense of having done a good job if it went well, if the stations cooperated and you were able to set up a very spectacular schedule for someone who wanted to be on their station. That to me was much more rewarding, and I felt more comfortable in that.
So it seems like you kind of enjoyed the pressure. Is that true, or were you someone who
You
was
don't enjoy the pressures. What you enjoy is being able to handle them and being able to go through whatever process you have to get to the point where the problem is solved or the job is done and you can breathe a sigh of relief. There's a lot of frantic stuff that goes on. People all want the same spot sometimes. It doesn't happen. So you have to be calm if you can be.
Did working with the commercials and then maybe going home at night and seeing, something that you helped schedule, were you ever saying to yourself, I kind of wish I was selling toothpaste?
Not really, because when you get down to it, that's a glamour job. It really doesn't have I don't think there's much satisfaction. You go in and you make one commercial. The commercial may run for 6 months, so you sit and watch yourself all the time. That would not be my way of wanting to work.
Do you know anyone today that you knew from working, like do you still have any friends from back then working in television?
We're talking ancient times here, Dan. No. Most everyone is retired and gone off to another life or is not around to talk to anyone.
That's too bad. So then going back to the stress point, was it ever, even though you said you could handle it, was there ever a point where you were just like, I'm so stressed out or something like that?
Yes, but generally when I would be stressed, it was a situation that involved other people as well. So it wasn't as though I was the only person who was having a hissy fit about something. Everybody else was upset. Mostly it was if a station that you had prepared a schedule for, the advertiser has agreed to it, they're all set to go. When suddenly they call back and they say, oh, by the way, we forgot about this and this didn't run, and we think we have to bump your commercial, that was when you really had a lot of talking to do. The salesman had to go back to the company, and that was something you couldn't control, but it was wrong and you couldn't fix it.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you worked at CBS in the 1950s.
I worked from 1950. No, yes, but I worked at CBS not only then, but my last position was in in the 60s. So I worked for 10 years.
Did you go anywhere after CBS, or did you?
CBS. While I was at CBS, I took 3 months off and went to Europe. And when I came back, the only station they could find a job for me was in Pennsylvania, and I didn't want to go there. So I went to Westinghouse, which was basically doing the same thing. Westinghouse at that time represented WBZ here in Boston, and so I was familiar with that. And I also knew a lot of the people who were there. They were some of the same people that I worked with before. It was a comfort to that.
And so basically, did you go anywhere from Westinghouse, or was Westinghouse the...
I went and married your grandfather. That's what happened.
I see. And did that have anything to do with the television industry?
No.
No.
He was a dentist. You know that.
Yeah, well, I know that, but not everyone else knows that.
No.
Now, would you say that working for any of these stations, led you to places in life that,
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I never would have met the friend that I went to Europe with, number one, which was a wonderful experience. I wouldn't have had some of the friendships that I have. I wouldn't have had the chance to live in New York City, which in itself is a very exciting. And also, I think the pressure of working and yet being able to do the job well all of that is very satisfying, and I look back at that as being a good time in my life.
Do you ever, or even then and now, watching TV saying, oh, I know how that's done, or...
Yes, I do. What I really like to laugh at is when somebody goofs up, and I know that whoever's had that commercial has to get a free one. And that's one of the worst things that happens, because then you go back to the station, they have to find a place to put these people and don't have to pay for it.
So you kind of find it funny when
they goof up.
When they goof up, but you also
Something
know the
goes wrong.
pain that they're going through.
I don't feel it so much anymore. No.
Right.
That was long ago.
When you were working there, if you made a mistake or if something happened, was it ever someone yelling at you or you would get in trouble or anything?
The worst mistake that I was accused of making was at WEI, when one of the salesmen accused me of completely losing an enormous amount of commercial time that was purchased by one of his clients. I'd only just come to the station. The girl who'd left, I didn't have a chance to talk to her. I didn't know where anything was. So he finally decided that probably I hadn't messed up, but it was a hard time. That was the worst time for me, and I was new at the station, so it was very difficult.
So you just decided to pick on the new kid?
I think maybe.
Well, I guess that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for watching. I'm Dan Sheehey with Barbara Wymer for the Dog Pound. That's all right.
Okay.
You told me 10 minutes, right?